afternoon will be offered by the good delegate from Prince George's County.
Colleagues, please bow your head. Dear God, the Father of all nations and the ruler of heaven and earth, we bow our heads and open our hearts to receive thee. We pray, dear God, for your blessing and anointing in all that we say and do. Guide our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Help us to walk in your truth and in your righteousness. Father, we have not forgotten the people of Ukraine. We lift them up in prayer. Hear their cries, dear God, and deliver them from the pain and anguish they have been forced to endure. Break the shackles and the backs of world leaders who are hostile and hungry for power, and grant understanding where there is none. Be merciful, dear God. Intervene with your mighty power by raining down your spirit of peace and compassion. Facilitate the cooling of hostilities as only you can. Above all, Father, we pray for your little precious children, for they are innocent casualties of war. They are at risk and they are fearful. They desperately need your loving kindness and protection. Let your love and forgiveness fill our very souls, and may every repentant heart receive their rightful portion of grace and favor according to your perfect will. May God be glorified in all that we do. Let the people of God say, amen, amen, and amen.
Amen. Quorum call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will call the roll. There being 128 members present, the House is now in session. The clerk will read the journal from the previous day.
Annapolis, Maryland, March the 19th, 2022.
Recognizing the Deputy Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much be considered the reading of the journal.
So ordered. Petitions, memorials, and other papers. Recognizing the gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to sincerely apologize for a tweet I sent Saturday morning. It was meant as a private message to a close friend. I immediately deleted it, and it was totally inappropriate. I'm truly sorry, especially to our wonderful Speaker and the Senate President, to whom I've reached out to personally. And I would also like to apologize to all of you in the House of Delegates. I am sincerely sorry. My comment was not appropriate, either in public or in private.
Thank you. Messages. Senate Bill 290. The clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 290, Budget Bill, Fiscal Year 2023.
Clerk will read the message from the Senate.
Ladies and gentlemen, the House of Delegates, the Senate refused to concur in the House amendments and respectfully requests the House recede from its position. So the House prefer a conference committee to confer the disagreeing votes of the two houses. The Senate appoints Senator Gazzoni chair, Senator Griffith, Senator McKay, Senator King, and Senator Roosevelt. In addition, the Senate has appointed in advisory capacity Senators Jackson, Young, and Edwards. Said bill is returned herewith.
Clerk will read the message to the Senate.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates does not recede in the House amendments to the Senate bill and agrees to a conference committee to confer the disagreeing votes of the two houses. The Senate has appointed Senator Gazzoni chair, Senator Griffith, Senator McCray, Senator King, and Senator Roosevelt. In addition, the Senate has appointed in advisory capacity Senators Jackson, Young, and Edwards. The House appoints Delegate McIntosh chair, Delegate Chang, Delegate Bridges, Delegate KORMAN, Delegate B. Barnes. In addition, the House has appointed in advisory capacity Delegates Grice, Resnick, and Smith. Said bill is returned herewith.
Message from the Chief Executive, Supplemental Budget Number 4. The clerk will read the supplemental budget and the committee assignment.
Dear Madam Speaker, pursuant to the authority conferred on me by Article 3, Section 52, Subsection 5 of the Constitution of Maryland, and in accordance with the consent of the House of Delegates duly granted, I hereby submit Supplemental Budget Number 4 to Senate Bill 290, House Bill 300 in the form of an amendment to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. Supplemental Budget Number 4 affects the previously estimated funds available for budget operations as shown in the following summary statement. Sincerely, Lawrence J. Hogan, Jr., Governor, referred to appropriations.
Message from the Senate number 41, Senate bills introduced in the House. The clerk will read the bills and committee assignments.
Senate Bill 23, Senator Carter, House Rules. Senate Bill 720, Senator Kelly, House Rules. Senate Bill 753, Senator Hester, House Rules. Senate Bill 955, Senator Benson, House Rules by order of Sylvia Siegert, Chief Clerk.
Report of the Committee on Environment and Transportation, report number 22. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 528, Climate Solutions Now, Act of 2022. Favor the amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing the committee chair.
We just need a second to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sure. Recognizing the vice chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
As amended, this bill makes broad changes to the state's approach to reducing statewide greenhouse gas emissions and addressing climate impacts. Among other things, the bill increases the statewide greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirement and requires the state to achieve net zero statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2045, establishes new and alters existing energy conservation requirements for buildings, increases and extends specified energy efficiency and conservation program requirements, establishes requirements for the purchase of zero-emission vehicles in the state fleet, and establishes new entities and new special funds to support related activities. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 strikes from the bill the provisions relating to landfill methane emissions, removes the sunset on increasing the statewide greenhouse gas emissions reduction target, and delays the target date to 2031, alters requirements and restrictions relating to the final greenhouse gas reduction plan, and requires the Commission on Climate Change to establish specified working groups. Amendment number 3 alters and clarifies terminology, defines the terms underserved community and overburdened community, requires MDE to coordinate with relevant stakeholders to access certain federal funding, and strikes from the bill the provisions relating to school construction. Amendment number 4 strikes language that would have established a new core program and instead expands the scope of the existing Chesapeake Conservation Corps program to administer certain climate mitigation and clean energy projects. The amendment also establishes labor standards for projects undertaken by certain investor-owned utility companies. Amendment number 5 strikes from the bill provisions relating to high-performance buildings, alters the application of the bill's building energy performance standards for existing buildings, requires the state to adopt certain electric-ready building requirements, and alters the membership of the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. Amendment number 6 alters the Empower Maryland annual energy saving percentage goals and the purposes for targeted electricity reductions. Amendment number 7 establishes an electric school bus pilot program and establishes certain state policy goals with regard to the state's electric distribution system. Amendment number 8 alters the bill's requirement that each primary procurement unit ensures that at least 75% of the electricity supply procured by the unit for use in state facilities is derived from no or low carbon energy sources, alters the requirements for the purchase of zero-emission vehicles in the state fleet, and requires the Climate Transition and Clean Energy Hub to also provide certain technical assistance for residential properties. Amendment number 9 makes changes to the bill's study requirements in the uncodified language and delays the sunset provision on the requirement for net zero statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. Move the amendments, Madam Speaker.
The question for the House is the adoption of the amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendments have been adopted. The question now is adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Recognizing, yes, something else, Vice Chair of the committee.
Madam Speaker, I do have a committee amendment at the desk.
Go ahead.
Amendment number 173620/1. So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 clarifies the definition of a covered building to include buildings owned by the state. Number 3 defines the term district energy. Amendment number 4 adds a member to the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. Amendment number 5 adds language to exclude from certain calculations greenhouse gas emissions or energy use by a food service facility that engages in commercial cooking and water heating. Amendment number 6 strikes language in the committee amendments that would have required the state to adopt certain electric-ready building requirements. Amendment number 7 increases the state share of eligible school construction costs for schools built as net zero buildings. Amendment number 8 strikes language that would have conditioned the requirements for the purchase of zero-emission vehicles in the state fleet on the availability of funding. And amendment number 9 changes a PSC reporting requirement from June 30th, 2023 to September 30th, 2023. Move the amendments.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Amendment has been adopted. The question now is the adoption of favor report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Recognizing the minority whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a couple softball questions for the floor leader, if I could.
Vice Chair of the committee.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
All right, so I'm good. So, you know, there's like a building code component to this particular bill, correct?
It's what's called a Building Energy Performance Standard that's to be adopted by MDE for large existing buildings.
Okay. Has any other state in the United States of America adopted requirements that get us to this like electrification requirement as ambitiously or as quickly as what's proposed in this bill?
Technically, it's just Elgin, if you don't mind, technically it's not an electrification requirement. It's a requirement that for these covered buildings, these large existing buildings, that the direct on-site building emissions are reduced by 20% by 2030 and to net zero by 2040. So with that in mind, New York City has adopted a code. Other states are considering this code. Other states have made, while maybe not requiring net zero by 2040, substantial reductions in these emissions.
Okay, so we're kind of the front runner in this regard then, based upon what you just told me, because New York City's done it, and other states are considering it, but they haven't done it yet. We would be the first, I imagine, to do that, right?
Well, in exactly this manner, yes, but again, other states have made requirements for substantial reductions in what they would describe as covered buildings.
Okay, and during your committee discussions regarding this proposed legislation, did you hear concerns expressed about the grid and the impact that going in this direction may have on the grid?
There were certain witnesses did express concern. I will say that this particular amendment is based on what is recommended by the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. It approved a suite of recommendations, including one very close to what's in this bill, 24-2. As part of that, there was an extensive study done by their consultant, which looked at the grid impact of what is being proposed here and determined that the grid impact, by at least as into the early 2030s, would not go beyond the peak impact that already exists in the summertime.
All right. One other question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, one other question that I had. I know the restaurant industry expressed some concerns about going down this path because a lot of them have to use or believe they have to use like gas, cooking equipment, and that sort of thing. Do you know if through your amendment process, if any of their concerns were addressed?
Yes, in fact, of the committee amendments that I discussed, amendment number 5 would exclude energy use and gas emissions by a food service facility that engages in commercial cooking and water heating.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Floor Leader.
You're welcome.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If the good gentleman from Baltimore County would indulge me, it's been very heavily amended, I know. I read a media report this morning. Sometimes you can't believe everything you read. But we had a debate a few days ago about some monies that had been set aside in the budget contingent on this bill being passed regarding net zero school building construction. And the report that I read in the media this morning was that the net zero school language had been excised from the bill by your committee. But then I heard you read something about some committee amendment that just sort of came in today, that the word net zero school was in there. So I was a little bit confused. Can you tell me what the current state of play is in the bill? Are you requiring net zero school construction? Are you keeping the I think it was $11 million. Is that still in there, or has that all been altered?
What has happened is this. The Senate bill originally had a requirement that each school district build at least one net zero school. That has been taken out by the House. What we did add in was part of House Bill 1290, which has already been passed by the House, that says for eligible school districts, the county shall receive a 5 percentage point increase in the state share of school construction project if the proposed project is to build a net zero school.
So you're adding, I'll just use my word, a sweetener, so to speak, that if the county decides to build a net zero school, if their formula, my county, I think, has got a fairly high formula. The state pays roughly 90%. That's probably because we only build a school about once every 20 years, so it's affordable. So we would get an extra 5% of the state share of the eligible costs if it's net zero. Is that the effect?
And that's correct. And if the county is eligible for an adjustment in the local cost share, as provided under the bill.
And is there any estimate with respect to that roughly $11 million that was fenced off in the budget contingent upon passing this bill? I assume when it had the original provision about we're going to require each county to do a net zero school project, is there any analysis that you're aware of, and I certainly know you're not part of the budget committees, but is there any analysis of how much of that $11 million that we tried to excise out last week will in fact now be spent or excised out as a result of the committee's action?
I don't believe we have an estimate as to what it would
May
be.
change.
It would be contingent on it's not a mandated provision, and really would be contingent on which among the eligible counties are interested in taking advantage of it. So I don't think there's any forecast of what that funding would look like.
And so then would it be fair to say, so the mandated appropriation that was in the budget, that was in the original Senate version of the bill, will no longer be mandated? There won't be $11 million sitting there for a mandate. It will now be subject year to year as the days go by for an adjustment. So there may be some more money coming out of the general fund or the school construction fund, depending upon how many of these projects actually come to fruition.
Madam Speaker, could I ask that I defer on that answer to the good delegate from the Appropriations Committee?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Standing up as the designated budget nerd. Just a reminder, there was no mandated appropriation in the budget last week. It was what's called fencing off appropriation. So the governor may or may not have released that money. It was up to him whether or not that money would be released. The provision of law that the good vice chair was just describing, that would be a requirement under the law. So regardless of what appropriation is fenced off or what have you, going forward, if this becomes law and is put into effect, jurisdictions that go forward with a net zero school will be eligible for a 5% sweetener, to use your term, an incentive, to use my chair's term, on their school construction match if they're going with a net zero school. Now, what we do with that $11 million that's in as a contingent, fenced off appropriation, that's why we have conference committees.
Right.
So there could be some changes to that before the final budget comes before us.
So that $11 million is therefore somewhat in flux. And when I use the word mandated, my understanding, I've never been on the Appropriation Committee, that fencing off would mean it could only really go to one of two purposes. It could be spent by the administration in the way directed by the legislature, or it would devolve to the general fund, to the rainy day fund, essentially. Is that correct?
I think it actually goes into the fund balance, but same idea.
Okay. And so the mandate would have been spend it our way or don't spend it at all. That may, in fact, in these negotiations, because the net zero requirement has been removed, that $11 million may go away. do we have an estimate, and we may not, I know these things may take some time, and it's a little bit contingent upon how many systems want to take advantage of this incentive, but do we have an estimate of how much money that could potentially cost the state if, a lot of times when we read these DLS fiscal notes, they just make assumptions. They say if every county did it, if we had 20 schools that did it, and this is what the average cost of a school is today, is there any estimate today of what this provision of the law may cost the taxpayer?
I don't think there's a firm estimate on what this provision of law would cost the taxpayer. I think the idea of the 5% is that was viewed as roughly what we would have thought the immediate sort of increased cost might be for a net zero school, most of which, keep in mind, would be sort of during the total cost of ownership be gained back. That was some of the work we did on the school construction work group. But yeah, if all 24 jurisdictions came out tomorrow and said they wanted to build a net zero school, I can't tell you off the top of my head what that would look like. And I know you have some ideas about what we should do with that $11 million. Maybe that's
I like that $11 million. Yeah, I like
but I don't think we fully know the answer to that yet. But I would say, before I cede back to the vice chair, that we want to incentivize school districts to be investing in net zero schools. This is a positive thing for our state.
Is there a rough estimate, and I know that the position is of your committee, I think your position was that the net zero school, you said over the length of ownership, because it may reduce utility costs and other things beyond the greenhouse gas costs, the social costs. I'm just talking the real utility costs for the school, the dollars and cents we can easily measure. I know you've said, well, that may actually be reduced over time, but is there any estimate, or can you give us any information? How much more does it cost to design and build in today's dollars a net zero school as opposed to a more traditionally designed school that doesn't have the net zero limitations?
Let me turn it back to the policy vice chair.
Getting double teamed over here. I like that's okay. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, if,
Vice Chair of the committee.
thank you. The range varies depending on the school, its site, and its location, but generally the range is anywhere from 3 to possibly 5%.
3 to 5% of the gross cost per school.
That's correct. And to specifically answer your question, yes, the utility costs over time more than make up for that increased premium, and relatively small as it is, but that increased premium in cost.
Okay. And so if I can ask you something different, we'll get off the net zero school concept for a minute. The legislation, as my understanding, sets forth a target for our emissions, that our emissions by a certain year in the future would be reduced. What is the target year, the base year that we estimate against for reduction?
2006.
Why is 2006 the year that is utilized?
Well, I would say it's because the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, which has identified that year as the base, and the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Scientists, has recommended that, or very close to be the baseline. And it is also codified in existing law with respect to existing greenhouse gas reduction requirements.
And what's the target in the legislation today, after all the significant rounds of amendments, both in the Senate and by the House committees? What's the target reduction from the 2006 estimated emissions baseline?
60% by 2031.
So do you have any sense of what year that would bring us back in line with? So in 2006, we're going to be 60% less than what we were in 2006. What year does that bring us roughly in line with of where our emissions baseline would have been? What are we trying to return to?
I don't think we have a precise estimate as to what year in time we'd be going back to.
Would it have been this century? Is that fair to say? Would it have been the 1980s, the 1970s, or would 60% of 2006 take us back to, pre-World War II days?
No, I don't think we could be going back that far, but we really have no way of estimating. And I don't believe the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, in their reports, in their greenhouse gas reduction aid plan, has estimated the year that this would take us back to. And also, just to fully answer your question, there is also it's not tied to 2006, but there is a net zero greenhouse gas requirement target that's established by 2045.
So 2045, is that what you said?
That's correct.
Thank you. So in 23 years, the goal of this legislation would be we have net zero carbon emissions. So I'm asking this quite innocently, frankly. has there ever been any type of actual measurement done historically that says, hey, this is when we were at net zero carbon emissions, or is this something that's simply a technological issue for today? I mean, net zero carbon emissions, you know, some people hear that and they return, like I am with technology, we return to Luddite times of like, we can't use anything because everything creates some type of a carbon footprint, carbon emission. You know, we fly planes. We didn't have much of a carbon emission, I guess, when we didn't have airplanes and cars and a lot of the modern conveniences. Has that ever been measured out in connection with these studies? And when we go to net zero, where would that potentially return us to from an industrial standpoint?
Well, the goal is that it would, in terms of the impact on the economy, that actually would have a positive impact on the economy. That is specified in the law compared to a no reduction scenario. And also, I do want to emphasize that this bill, even though it does set a net zero goal by 2045, it does require reauthorization by the legislature of that target by 2030.
And in, let's just say in the last 8 years, to your knowledge, have we already set some of these net zero goals or reduction goals and then rolled them back closer in time, or is this the first time we've ever done that?
I guess your question is this the first time in statute that we've established this
Yeah.
goal? This is the first time in statute that we would be setting this target. I believe the previous version of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act set as a goal 80% reduction.
So they just want, the previous version just wanted to get to 80% at some defined point in the future. Now we want to get to 100% at a very well defined point, 2045.
The 80% goal, I believe, was by 2050.
So we were at 80% by 2050. Now we've moved it to 100% by 2045. You're telling me that the legislature, whomever is blessed to be in this room in 8 years, will have to come back in 2030 and reauthorize this amount, and technically they could then roll it back even further. They could say 100% by 2040, for example.
It would be up to the legislature, but again, there is a specific requirement that the net zero goal by 2040 be reauthorized by the legislature for it to take effect.
2040 or 2045?
I'm sorry, 2045. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Yes.
So in order to get to net zero by 2045, is it the belief of the advocates of this legislation that you would have to eliminate all petroleum, coal, fossil fuel, natural gas-based uses of heat and energy? In order to get there, do you have to wipe all those out?
No.
Okay, so
Now,
how
keep in
do you
mind,
do it?
keep in mind, this is, I mean, it does, as a premise for this, and again, this has been repeated numerous times by the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, which is housed within the Department of the Environment, that we need to increasingly electrify our economy, but the idea is not to wipe out, I mean, to use your term, those fossil fuel uses. And again, the goal is, the target is net zero by 2045. So that means you could have, for example, if carbon capture technology has accelerated, that would be sequestering carbon. We just passed a bill last year that requires a significant increase in tree planting, in large part because they are a natural form of sequestration. So it is when you balance out those carbon sinks, be they natural ones or ones that might be available through technology in the future versus future emissions, that is the goal, to be at net zero.
So may it be possible then, through increased carbon sequestration and perhaps some increased technological advancements in the use and the decarbonization of traditional fossil fuels, whether it be natural gas, coal, petroleum, that in fact you could continue to use that traditional fuel base in the same percentages that you do now, but that technology will enable it to be much more clean, and it will be balanced out by the mitigation effects that we take through carbon sequestration and other measures?
I would be reluctant to characterize it as the same percentage as our energy use is today, that is fossil fuels as a percentage of energy use, but because the thinking is we do need to substantially electrify our economy, be it in transportation. This bill deals partly with buildings, other parts of the economy, but there is no thought that we are wiping out the use of fossil fuels in our economy.
Do you have any idea, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot if you don't, do you have any idea, you keep talking about electrification, and electrification is the future. Do you have any idea how much of the current electrical grid load in Maryland is generated through fossil fuel sources versus being generated from, let's just say, wind or solar?
You mean in terms of the actual power that is generated?
Right,
that
like
is
we've
used
got
in
the
Maryland
lights
home?
on in the building. I don't know where the electric comes from. I'm not that smart. It comes from somewhere, a power plant or off of the grid. Do you have any idea how much of that grid capacity is actually backed by, you know, what I would call more traditional fossil fuel sources as opposed to alternative energy sources?
I will rely on the expertise of the good chair of economic matters.
Oh, that's your first
It says
mistake.
30%.
30%.
But keep in mind, Delegate, this bill does not deal with the sources of the power that's on the grid. This just deals with end uses, for example, with buildings.
So our goal in the bill then is to increase electrification as opposed to the use of, for example, gas, natural gas to provide heating or energy, but we're not prescribing how we get the electric. So if we could get the electric through cleaner coal sources, through natural gas plants, through nuclear energy, that's okay under the definitions of the bill or what we're looking for in this legislation?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answers. I'm sure we'll have more of a debate tomorrow, but I appreciate it.
Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Hearing. Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Could the floor leader please rise for a quick question?
Vice Chair of the committee.
So in our committee, we had some discussion. I brought an amendment up, and the idea would be to add the Secretary of Transportation or the Secretary's designee to the work group or commission. So I'd ask to consider that friendly. Would you consider that friendly? Would you like to discuss it?
Madam Speaker?
Chairman.
Yes, it's an interesting amendment. What I would like to do is special order this amendment until the third reader debate. It's a Senate bill, so it can be amended on third reader.
You can do it now.
Well, I'm suggesting that we special order the amendment until the third reader.
Oh, okay.
Madam
That's
Speaker,
fine. That's fine.
I'll bring the amendment to third reader.
Okay. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Okay. Bill is ordered printed for third reading. Report of the Committee on Judiciary. Report number 27. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 691, Juvenile Justice Reform, favorable.
Question for the House is the adoption of the favorable report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted.
Madam Speaker.
Are there any amendments to the bill as to its title? Recognizing the minority leader.
Madam Speaker, given the nature of this bill, it's a very significant bill, and we've just recently got an opportunity to look at any changes to it from the Senate version. With the consent of the committee chair, will we be able to special order this until tomorrow for further consideration?
Tomorrow morning's fine, thank you.
Tomorrow morning will be fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. Question for the House is the special order SB 691 to the appropriate time tomorrow. Special order calendar number 56. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 387, Public Safety, Untraceable Firearms, favor report adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm earning my salary tonight one way or the other. I appreciate it. Would the floor leader rise just for a couple of questions to clarify what this bill does now with the Senate amendments? Thank you. How are you?
Sure, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good. So we had a fairly protracted debate, I recall, it seems forever ago, it was probably only a couple of weeks ago here, about the House version of this bill. My understanding is there have been some pretty significant changes in the Senate version of the bill that was then approved by the Judiciary Committee. Can you give me some type of summarization of what the differences are from the House version that we have passed to the Senate version that is now being recommended for passage?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank
you. You're right, there were several amendments, but to give you some bullet points, so to speak. The penalty section changed, so sale or transfer of an unserialized firearm is now 5 years, $10,000. Possession is 2 years, $10,000. It also adds a mens rea requirement for possession. It extends the enactment for possession back 2 more months. So from January 1st to now, enactment date for possession would be March 1st, 2023. It also gives people who inherit unserialized firearms 30 additional days to handle them. And then it also changes the serialization requirements.
Okay. So a couple questions. When you talk about the penalty changed, is it fair to say, and I may be getting this wrong, that the penalties from the Senate version are less overall than what the penalties were from the House version? Or did they change and go up?
They went up. There's now a heightened penalty if you are someone who is selling, transferring, purchasing, or otherwise receiving an unserialized firearm. So they're enhanced.
What about the penalty for possession? Did that, in the House version, was that still a felony and now it's been reduced to a misdemeanor with a smaller sentence?
It's 2 years, 10,000, so less than the House version.
Less than the House version on simple possession. And you talked about, I frankly don't know whether you went to law school or not. We use words like mens rea, and I think that's unfair to some of our colleagues who may not know what that means, just like I wouldn't know what a lot of things environmental scientists would talk about. So mens rea, my understanding, requires an actual intent. So the state would have to prove that the individual knew and intended and had a purpose to possess the unserialized firearm versus it was simply an inadvertent situation that they weren't aware of the law, it hadn't been sort of introduced or announced to them, they hadn't been given any warning. Is that what the intent of the committee's bill is now, to exempt those types of people from criminal prosecution?
Yes, mens rea does mean criminal or intent. So under this version, someone can only be charged if they knew or should have known that their firearm was not serialized in a way that's compliant with the law.
Okay, so that would, I would assume, create largely a higher barrier for prosecution for those people who are innocent hobbyists or who use these, or you indicated had perhaps inherited them. They're getting a little bit longer period to go through this process that we'll talk about, the serialization. But if they were like, hey, I had no reason to know, I got the firearm, it appeared to be a normal firearm, I'm not expert in it, I didn't check underneath the barrel or on the handle or wherever it may be for the serialized numbers, there's no evidence that I was aware of that I purchased and made the gun myself after this bill was enacted. And that person, in theory, would then have a pretty good defense to say that they did not have the mens rea necessary to form the possession offense. Is that fair?
Yeah, that was the intent of this bipartisan amendment.
Great, fantastic. The serialization process, we had a lengthy discussion about how this would happen or couldn't happen, and some people thought it couldn't work, and you thought it could work, and I'm sure other people, from your perspective, thought it could work. Is there now some type of a state police registry for these guns, these sort of homemade guns or block kit guns, different from serialization?
So under the Senate version of the bill, there is a requirement that people will have to serialize their privately made unserialized firearms. But yes, there's an additional requirement that people who have made these firearms go through the voluntary registry system that already exists with the Maryland State Police. And there's $150,000 that's appropriated to continue that program.
So my understanding then is that they would still have to somehow, I'm just creating a hypothetical. I certainly wouldn't know how to do this. I purchased one of these kit-made guns or the components for it. I made it on my own 10 years ago, 5 years ago for hobbyist purposes, whatever reason. I have it. It doesn't have any markers or identifications that would constitute serialization now. Under the bill that will be before us for final passage, would that person still have to go and somehow create a serial number or an identified marker for that weapon?
Yes, they would, but it's a far simpler process. So let me explain what would happen to you. So not a hypothetical, but if you do have a constituent who comes to you and says, I have made this firearm 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's not serialized, what do I do if I want to keep this firearm, right? There's several options that a hobbyist routes they can take, but if they do want to serialize it, this is what they would do. They would go to an FFL. The FFL would engrave the owner's initials, they would engrave the owner's zip code, and then a number that is unique to the owner. So again, if this is the only firearm that they have personally made, they can just put 1 because that's a number that's unique to the owner's arsenal, right? Then they would go home and enter that information to the Maryland State Police Voluntary Registry System. So if anything were to happen to that firearm, if it was stolen or lost, it could be traced back to the owner.
That does sound like a more simplified process than what we had talked about before of trying to get a unique identifier. I guess it just occurred to me, what if someone, my initials are JCB, what if someone within, I live in the zip code 21502, what if someone within my same zip code with my same initials went to two different FFL dealers? I went on a Monday and said, hey, make it JCB 215021, and someone with my same initials went to another guy, 2 days later down the block, and they got JCB 215021 put on theirs. Would that create a problem ultimately with tracking those guns if they were ever used in a crime or stolen, which is what my understanding, the whole intent of this was to crack down on the illegal use of guns, not simply to make it more difficult to have legal guns.
Sure. So it's not a foreseeable problem. This part of the legislation was actually initiated by the Maryland State Police. And so I think if there is a situation where a privately made firearm had similar serialization, then the good old, boots to the ground, law enforcement, investigating part takes over, where they're going to call those hobbyists, figure out who exactly it belongs to, whether it's a Glock 17 that belongs to someone or a Glock 22 that belongs to someone else.
Can you make a Glock with it? I didn't know that. Can you make a Glock with a ghost gun?
100% make a Glock. Actually, most polymer 80s are semi-automatic military-style handguns in the style of a Glock.
In the style of a Glock, but it's not. I mean, Glock maintains their intellectual property about it that says, hey, I can't walk around and call it a Glock because it wasn't made by Glock.
You can take the slide of a traditionally manufactured Glock and put that on a polymer 80 frame, and that's what law enforcement has said they see pretty frequently.
Thank you. Now, and I appreciate sort of clarification of how the bill has changed and evolved, and I think some of that is good. At the end of the day, the legislation still will make the purchase, will it still make the purchase of these kits illegal after the, is it March 2023 date?
That's true. At the enactment date, you can no longer purchase an unserialized kit or an unserialized firearm. However, we do expect the ATF regulations to take place as soon as April or perhaps as late as this fall. And when the ATF regulations take place, then presumably individuals will be able to buy gun kits, but they just have to be serialized and treated like any other type of firearm.
And that's the ultimate plan here, is that you would be able to continue to engage in this from a hobbyist perspective, but there would be some identifying marker from the manufacturer of the components, so that we wouldn't be eliminating or criminalizing the activity. We just want to do it through a serialization or more uniform requirement.
The goal of this legislation has always been to create a pathway for hobbyists to continue their hobby while shutting down the supply chain, the iron pipeline of unregulated firearms.
Thank you for your answers. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a quick question for the floor leader.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hello. So you said, I was just going through the process, so right now you have to go to an FFL dealer, which there are very few of them, and then they will put the initial, the zip code, or some special marking on there. Now, do they have to do it on site, or can they keep it and come back the next day?
If an FFL takes any type of firearm overnight, they have to put it into an A&D log, an acquisitions and depositions. But typically speaking, engraving doesn't take very long. It takes probably, especially with such limited numbers of characters that need to be engraved, I wouldn't expect it would take more than like 15, 20 minutes once they sit down to do it.
But in the event, if you do leave it overnight and you put it in your A&D book, when they come back to retrieve it, to reclaim it, what do they have to do? Anything, or they just hand it back to them?
Well, once it's in the A&D log, it's compliant with record keeping, so there's nothing else that they would need to do further.
There actually is. So they have to fill out a 4473 form, which have to call the NICS Operations Center and get a
4473 is the federal it's a NICS background check.
Correct.
For a primary sale, right? So that's not necessary because they're not purchasing anything.
It is necessary because once you enter it in there, it's a redemption of your own item. So you still have to have a 4473. I just want to make sure that this bill is silent on the 4473, so maybe we can get a clarification, because once you enter it in the A&D book and you pick it up, you have to have a 4473. It's an ATF permit, and you have to call the next for approval to pick it back up.
A 4473 is for the purchase of a regulated firearm or a long gun, so it's not necessary in the sake of engraving a frame or a receiver.
It actually is.
There's no
transfers.
purchase. That's not the action being done.
It is. It's actually, it's for transfer, redemption, or purchase. You have to fill a 4473.
Well,
It's federal guidelines.
Delegate, I would ask that next time you renew your FFL license, maybe that's something that you could ask along with keeping the same number.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think perhaps you should ask someone else to,
Answer my question?
yeah, I mean, you're not satisfied with my answer,
Well-
and it's the right answer.
It's not the right answer, because we're a legislative body. We're passing a law that's not correct. Madam Speaker, can someone else answer the question maybe that knows how to answer it?
What you, with the
I could-
information,
Madam Speaker,
Chairman of the committee.
the floor leader has worked on this issue for 4 years. She's worked very hard on this issue. She's provided you with an answer to the question.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The answer to the question is incorrect. I've been an FFL dealer for 20 years, so I don't think the answer is correct. And if that's your answer, but that's not the correct answer. And we cannot pass a bill that's not 100% complies with legal requirement from the ATF. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. House resolutions recognizing the gentlelady from Anne Arundel County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today is an important milestone in the history of Maryland's historic State House. 250 years ago, at noon, on March 28, 1772, Governor Robert Eden laid this cornerstone of the building, which would become the structure we all serve in today. The oldest State House in the nation, it has been in continuous legislative use since then. The Maryland General Assembly has met in this building since 1779. And as one of the representatives from the district in which it stands, I am so proud to be here today for this very special moment in history. Madam Speaker, permission to use the delegate's name.
Which delegate? In
My
this
seat.
chamber?
Yes, ma'am. My seatmate.
Can we use it? Okay, permission granted. Don't everybody think that, okay. Just tell me.
On behalf of Delegate Henson and myself, we have prepared a resolution to honor this historic milestone, which is at the desk.
Will the reading clerk please read the resolution in full?
Be it hereby known to all that the House of Delegates of Maryland commemorates the 250th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of the Maryland State House by Governor Robert Eden on March 28, 1772. The entire membership extends best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution to be presented on this 28th day of March 2022.
That ends the work at the desk. Committee announcements. Judiciary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. The House Judiciary Committee will have a voting session at 6:30 tonight, 6:30.
Barb. Rules.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Rules Committee will meet jointly tomorrow morning with the Senate Reapportionment and Redistricting Committee on Zoom at 8:30 a.m. Thank you.
Any other committee announcements? Okay. Any caucus announcements? Republican caucus.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Republican caucus will meet tomorrow morning at 8:50 a.m. 8:50 a.m. in room 145.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman rising for what purpose?
Point of order. Just a quick question. Maybe a parliamentarian could answer it. How can, so the Senate over there has a bill dealing with redistricting. I'm guessing Rules is meeting tomorrow morning to deal with that bill. I'm just wondering how they can deal with that bill prior to it being read across the desk in the House.
Madam Speaker.
Majority Leader.
It's a joint hearing on a bill that's being introduced in the Senate tonight.
So I'm still not following you. Doesn't the bill have to be read across the desk?
It'll be
in
read
the
across
House?
the desk in the Senate tonight.
But how can the House rules?
We'll be acting off a Senate bill.
But it still hasn't been read across the desk in the House.
Like any other bill that's introduced, a bill can be introduced in one chamber or the other because we have a bicameral legislature. So we're having a joint hearing on a bill that's being introduced in the Senate tonight.
Okay. So this bill didn't adhere to any type of Open Meetings Act, or I don't recall any hearing being held on it.
First of all,
over in the House.
I'm not sure what bill you're referring to, but the bill is being introduced in the Senate tonight. I've answered your question.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Quorum call before adjournment.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? Clerk will take the call. There being 131 members present, the House is still in session, recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stand adjourned until Tuesday, March 29th at 10 a.m., Legislative Day, March 21st.